Joining me today is an author, a screenwriter, the host of The Andrew Klavan Show, and one of the few sane people on the internet. Andrew Klavan, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I love your new studio.
Thanks. Well, you were one of the last guests before we built this home studio, and we had you on at a very odd time because it was right before the election, but we were going to air it after the election because I had to pad some shows because we were building this. So I, and perhaps you too, went on the assumption that Hillary was going to win, and then people immediately after we aired it said, "You got to get Klavan back on because you guys got to clean this whole thing up." So you ready to do some cleaning?
I'm ready. I'm here. Yeah.
All right. So where I want to start first is I do consider you one of the few sane people
that speaks ill of you.
But I consistently, every time I watch one of your clips or I see what you're tweeting about, you strike me as you basically strike me as decent, which these days I think has a correlation between decency and sanity. That's a lot of pressure I'm giving you.
No, it is sad that being decent actually elevates you above the herd these days. But you know, it's the thing with me is that I can state what my principles are. I try to follow my principles, and I try not to get too mixed up with personalities, which in this day and age, with a president like Trump, with like the people around him, makes things a lot clearer. Because that's what people are paying attention to. They're paying attention to the big faces. They're paying attention to he said this and she said that. And I'm just like trying to follow that principle, which I know what it is, and I'm trying to follow that thing.
Yeah, so I think I come from a similar place. And I think, our politics, which do line up in a lot of ways, not fully, but that's what I try to go for. Where do you think that comes from within you, that you don't go for all of that other stuff that so many people do?
Well, in me, it's actually a matter of time, observing over time what works, what doesn't work, and also, it's just been a basic, maybe it was the time I was raised in, but it has been a basic principle of mine that people should be free, that you should be free, that you are, made by God to be a free person, that the things that are happening inside you, that are expressed in the things that you like and the things that you want to say and your opinions and all that all those things are uniquely valuable. And even if you're a jackass, even if you're saying stuff that makes me want to strangle you, if you're a racist or something like this, I think that there's something uniquely valuable about that. And I know that it's more important than some guy in Washington who knows better than you. And I think that's always been my assumption. I was raised in that all-American way. I was raised in the suburbs in the early 60s, it's just that was kind of that was the civic religion. Mm-hmm. And it always seemed good to me. And when things changed, I would listen to the arguments. And I've changed, I've developed, and things are different over time, but certain principles stay the same. And if you stick with that, you basically, I don't know, it's a question of actually enjoying other people. And even when they can be jerks sometimes, I like them, I like people.
You mean you can enjoy sitting across from someone that you don't agree with? Are you saying that you can do that?
This is the thing. Whenever I see on YouTube it says so-and-so destroys someone else, I like when it says so-and-so talks to someone else in big letters, because when you talk to people you disagree with, if they don't get angry at you, and they're not shouting at you, you learn a lot of stuff, and you can and you hone your own arguments, and sometimes, on occasion, you change your mind. I mean, I would say if I had to place myself on the political spectrum, I'd be a libertarian. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons I changed on abortion took 20 years, but I had an argument with a guy and I lost it.
All right.
And I thought, you know what? I can't defend my position against this guy.
Yeah, which is a great teachable moment.
It's a real teachable moment, and it reminds you to listen to people,
I like that you just used the phrase civic religion, because one of the things I've been talking about on here is that, to me, leftism has become a secular religion.
Yes.
I've had a couple people mention this idea. Peter Boghossian was on a couple weeks ago, who really explained it well. But that basically this has become this infallible doctrine that you must never leave.
Right.
And if you do leave, you're going to basically have a fatwa on your head.
Right.
But a civic religion is an interesting phrase, because basically your civic religion in that regard was just live and let live.
Well, pretty much, yes. And,
basically.
And the idea that, that the more government there is, the less of a person there is, the fact that a woman comes into a town and says, oh, I know how to do people's hair, and the government says, well, you need a permit for that. You need a permit to do hairdo. You know, it's just a kind of ongoing.
This is a bald guy issue, right?
Exactly. Well, you know, you read those occasional stories where some little kid has a lemonade stand and the police pull up, you know, because he doesn't have a permit. I mean, that is the stuff that is so offensive to me. And it's like, I guess over time, I've kept watching people who told me that they were trying to make the world more free and more fair. But it always turned out, not always, but it often turned out that what they were really trying to do was take the power away from someone they thought was oppressing them and take it themselves so that they could oppress the person who had been oppressing them. And I have like just steadfastly maintained that like, I want the world to be more free and more fair. I'm perfectly willing to accept that somebody's been marginalized and needs to be included, but I'm not willing to force this other guy to like it or to include him or to serve him or do anything else. It just seems to me that freedom is a balance. You know?
Yeah, you mentioned something very briefly about God. Now, last time you were on, we did sort of your whole evolution, which is really kind of fascinating. You were born Jewish, then you were atheist for what, a bulk of your
35 years.
For 35 years.
Agnostic atheist.
Yeah, and then about how old were you when you then
I was about 45 when I became a theist, when I started to believe in God, and I was just about 50 when I was baptized,
Yeah. So how, I just had your friend Dennis Prager on. And my friend Dennis Prager. And Michael Shermer. Do you know Michael by any chance? Michael, who runs Skeptic magazine.
Oh, yes.
And we had a great conversation about belief and morality with God or without God. It was really great. And at the end, we all agreed, wow, how nice we can sit in a room and not agree on everything, and we might have dinner together, you know? But for you, as someone that's, you know, traveled in and out of religion, how important is the idea of religion as a foundational belief for society?
Well, the only reason to believe in religion, as far as I'm concerned, is because it's true. Okay, that's the only reason. So the idea that it's good for society, or it is, conducive to law and order, conducive to politeness, I'm not interested in believing in a fantasy just because it works. And I've always hated arguments based on practicality when it comes to metaphysics. You know, I mean, to me, you can be a nice person, obviously, without being a theist at all. There are plenty of nice atheists, lovely people who are atheists. But I do believe that most of what you think is true is illogical without religion, without God. And many people don't follow their own thoughts down to the ground. And this is true of both atheists and believers. And I do believe that, here's what I think has happened to us. I think that, you know, right around the 17th century, science became what we know it to be. And certain questions were put aside in order to do science. So in other words, you had people saying, hey, I can measure this, and then I can predict this, and then I can heal this, and I can build this. And all these things are such a great, you know, obviously such a great benefit to society, from the iPhone to penicillin, whatever you're talking about. All this stuff has revolutionized human life. It was assumed, and it was argued, that there was an underlying logic to science which precluded God, which eliminated God, even though most of the people who invented science were Christians. There was presumed that there was an underlying logic. So in other words, they say there's evolution, and if there's evolution, everything is random. And you go, well, okay, there's evolution, but random, you can't tell randomness from within a system. You can't say I'm in a system and it's random, because obviously the order of a system, every system comes from outside the system. I believe that logic is starting to collapse. I believe that logic has played out, and I believe it has been sold to us in the materialism, basically materialism, that everything is material. Everything has a material cause. The material explanation is better than that. That, I believe, is toxic, because it doesn't make sense, because you cannot get from morality to materialism and from materialism to morality. That, I believe, has had a toxic effect on our society. And so I don't want to replace materialism with theism because I think it's toxic. I want to do it because I think the truth is healing and liberating.
So without going too far down, just specifically the rabbit hole of belief, because we've done it a bunch on the show, and I find that even for atheists and believers, everyone kind of gets to a point where it's like, all right, well, the good ones at least get to a point where it's like, all right, well, that's what I believe, and it frames some other stuff, so let's talk about that. So without going too far down that rabbit hole, if you think that those systems are collapsing, is that really a metaphor? or a bridge to why so many systems seem like they're collapsing right now?
Yes.
Media, politics.
I think that's exactly what's happening. I will sit here and predict to you that I believe in the next, actually I believe it's happening now, but I believe it will erupt at some point, that there's going to be an intellectual revival of, it's really Aristotelian thought, the idea that we're here, we have a purpose, that bottle has a purpose, that this body has a purpose, this mind has a purpose. That is already coming back. And when you talk to people, it's really interesting. When you go in to the top universities and you talk to the young people there who are the best minds of the country, they're all believers. They all believe in God, which wouldn't have been true, I think, 30, 40 years ago. And this is because ideas play themselves out over time. And this idea that the world is material is ending. And yes, I think a lot of the craziness we're seeing, and that, you know, I hate talking about some of these extraordinary political things because it sounds like you're being mean. Like it sounds like when I say if a man has an operation and turns himself into a woman, he's not a woman. That's a statement of fact to my mind. It doesn't mean that he should be abused or bullied or hurt or anything like that. It's a totally different question. Yeah. But some of these questions where reality is starting to disappear, I think are built into the fact that this idea is collapsing.
It's so interesting because I do believe that trans people exist. I mean, I'm not saying.
So do I.
Yeah, I don't think you said that they don't exist, but that I believe that it is a actual. I don't want to say it's an actual existential thing for this particular person. But yet I can still go with you in that place because it seems like the hysteria constantly surrounding it is making people question everything. You know what I mean? Like if you don't accept trans people the second that everyone else accepts them, or not even accepts them, because I think most people accept them, but if you don't celebrate it immediately or wish for a trans child, it's like they will turn on you as you're a transphobe.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that to give a child to hormone treatments or any kind of operation based on some kind of stated preference, that I believe is abusive. That I believe is wrong. But for an adult to decide that he wants to live his life in any way he wants, as long as he's not hurting anybody, it means nothing to me. I mean, it just means nothing to me. But when he says to me, "You must call me a woman," then he is taking away my right to experience reality as I experience it. And that's where he loses his rights.
So this strikes me as you're sort of like a mature Republican. You know what I mean? Like that's what it strikes me as. Like because everything you just said makes sense within a conservative viewpoint.
Yeah.
You know, within a libertarian conservative viewpoint, except there's so few conservatives willing to say that, what you just said.
Well, you know, it's funny, you asked me at the very beginning how I kept hold of some of these principles, and it didn't occur to me until just a moment ago as we were talking about, one of the things is, I'm a novelist. I've lived most of my life writing novels, and when you're a novelist, what you do is you create characters, and each one of these characters has a full, complete existence and a full, complete justification. Even when you're inventing the bad guy, you realize that in his mind, the world makes perfect sense, and he makes perfect sense in that world. And I actually think of people that way. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a novelist training, or maybe you start out with that and it turns you into a novelist. But I actually think of people that way. I actually think of somebody who says to me, I'm having this inner experience of being alienated from my sex, or whatever it is. That doesn't offend me.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, that seems like, I feel it might be painful, and it offends me if he says that I have to react in a certain way, or this guy has to react by law in a certain way. But his experience is like, it really is part of the kind of fabric of the world. And I think that there has been, too many people on both sides have conflated what government does with how we live. So, in other words, I've had this argument with conservatives a lot, where they'll say, well, they want to legalize marijuana. And I'll say, fine, just don't let people drive with marijuana, you know, and like, what, you want to poison yourself? I think it's bad for you, but, you know, it's none of my business. Go ahead.
Do you think marijuana is bad for you?
I do think it's bad for you, but what I've read, it's bad for you, but I don't use it, so I don't really know that much about it.
And you don't seem to want to stop someone from using it.
Why would I want to stop somebody from using it? Except if it were you, I might say, Dave, you know, I've read some articles, not good for you, whatever. But then you know it's coming from me, and you can say he's...
With the vape pen, there's virtually no... Well, it's not even, you know, for the lungs, come on.
But this is the thing. Government should not have the right to approve or disapprove. It only has the right to protect me from you. It shouldn't protect me from me. If I want to throw myself off a bridge, you know, do I think that's right? No, but I should be able to throw myself off a bridge. what I shouldn't be able to do. The best example I always use is the seat belts versus a cell phone. You know, when you use a cell phone in a car, you're endangering me. When you don't use your seatbelt, you want to fly through the windshield, that's none of my business.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I know that libertarians take some extreme, crazy positions, but in general, free markets, free minds seems to me the way forward. You know?
So I do see the freedom thing gaining traction,
Yes.
for sure. Even the way that I've talked a lot, obviously, about classical liberalism and libertarianism and all of this, I see that now. I see it. I just see it in society and on social media. I see it more in a cooler fashion than it would be if it was maybe coming from Ted Cruz or something. Like I see it's gaining a little traction in a bigger way, and I'm certainly not all because of me, obviously, all because of you. Mostly. But I like what you said about that there'll be an intellectual resurgence too, because I am starting to see a little bit of that it's starting to feel cool to have knowledge again, as opposed to the 15 years of endless reality TV and just the worst of us constantly and endless bickering and one-upping. I think we're starting to turn a corner on that, which I've been waiting for a long time.
Well, I mean, it's an awful, you know, I recently spoke, I don't get to speak too often at places, partly because I ignore the requests, and now I have somebody who does it, so maybe I'll be speaking. But I spoke at Oberlin recently, which is a deeply, like, the heart of liberal darkness, as far as and I went in there, and I felt that these children, who at my age they now look like children, you know, I felt that they were being almost abused by their heritage of knowledge, of wisdom, was being taken away from them. That if, you know, you should come out of college, you should have read some Shakespeare, you know, and you should have read some of the great writers, you should know some of these great thinkers, Plato and people like that, and you should know them without the professor standing between you and the guy. You know, Shakespeare has traveled through time, 400 years, to bring you the wisdom, a unique vision of the world. I don't need a professor doing anything but explaining the context to me, you know, and they have this thing called theory and all this. And you know, at Oberlin, there was a black dorm. I mean, Martin Luther King would roll over in his grave. You know, there were kids who showed up, you know, kind of aggressively displaying their sexual proclivities and then heckling me from the crowd. And I kept saying, you know what? Hold your question, and I'm gonna discuss everything you want to discuss. And then the minute I finished talking, they ran away.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought, like,
Isn't that something? It's just right there.
You know, and what was interesting was a lot of the liberal kids who were just ordinary liberals, they stayed, and we had really good conversations. Only the hecklers ran away.
Yeah.
And so I just think these kids are being deprived. They're being deprived of their intellectual heritage. They're being deprived of the idea that I can't fix their problems. What they're being told is that they're unhappy because they're being unhappy because of the way I treat them, or you treat them, or society treats them. They're unhappy because of things inside themselves. I mean, you know, there was this gay guy yelling at me the whole time, and at one point I mentioned to somebody else in another context that I was actually a supporter of gay rights. And he let out this loud, well, thank you. And I thought, you know, you think people don't like you because you're gay. They don't like you because you're a lout.
Yeah. That's what equality is all about. That you just want people to be equal so that you can treat them as shitty as you treat everybody else. I don't want special treatment for being gay. You know what I mean? It's like, give me equal treatment and now judge me accordingly.
Exactly. And I think this has come, you know, I see guys like this, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Mm-hmm. And he writes these letters to his son. You need to be made good for the sins of the past. What a terrible thing to tell a child. Nobody can solve the sins of the past. That's the whole point of the past. It's past, you know? Mm-hmm. And you cannot fix the things that were done to people. You cannot fix history. You can't pay people back for things that happened to people who are dead, you know? That's the tragedy of a fallen world, you know, that things are written into the fabric of life. And to tell somebody that he's not going to be happy until he gets payback for slavery or whatever it is, it's condemning him to misery.
Yeah, it's just endless because it never stops. The payback, whatever it is, there's never a moment where you go, okay, well, we got to where we were supposed to get, and now we don't need anything else anymore. It just, by human logic, it doesn't make sense.
And this used to be the question of education. What is the good life? what's conducive to happiness? What is, what makes you miserable? That used to be what you discussed, and the answer can't be my happiness depends on you being nice to me, because you're going to be what you are.
I'm curious, what group invited you at Oberlin?
It was a bunch of Republicans. It was like the 15 Republicans, And what was I kind of surprised them.
They just wanted a 16th guy to finally show up.
They were like trolls, They were they wanted me to come and make fun of the left, and I didn't. And I thought even though the whole thing went incredibly well, I actually just talked about ideas, and people listened. And I thought, well, that's a victory, right? But I felt that conservatives are so sick of being shouted at that they've just turned into trolls. They want to mock the other side.
Yeah, which I think is kind of interesting, because I say it all the time, but I only get invited now to colleges by the young Republicans or the Libertarians of tomorrow, Students for Liberty, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things that are technically right, even though they don't seem to mind that I'm gay married and pro-choice and against the death penalty and a litany of other things. And then it's like, well, who is the tolerant side? I don't get any invites from anyone. No young Democrats or progressives of tomorrow have ever called me and been like, Dave, we actually see you've been criticizing our side, but let's come and talk about it. But I'm getting a ton of love from those other guys, who, by the way, you're right, there's a lot of trolls in that too. They've started being the funny people too.
That's right.
Which is that for you as a screenwriter and a guy that's bounced between Hollywood and politics, is that fascinating to you that
It's
the
also
right
joy,
is starting to become funny?
It's a joy. I mean, my joke used to be that the reason conservatives aren't funny is because liberals have no sense of humor about themselves. But it is a joy to see conservatives becoming funny and becoming the people of freedom. Because let's face it, conservatism in the old style did have its oppressive elements, and it did have its kind of, whenever people are in charge of the culture, as conservatives were until the 60s, basically, they abuse that control. That's part of power corrupting. And there was that element and there still is among conservatives, that somehow you are destroying the republic by not being exactly, a Bible-beating Christian or whatever it is, and that is largely lifted. I mean, so this is actually an effect. I would say a positive effect that the 60s revolution has had on conservatives, is they too have loosened up. Nobody wants to go back to wearing ties to baseball games. Nobody wants to go back to a rigid life where you can't be. Look, take feminism. Feminism right now, to me, like environmentalism, is largely the enemy. The feminists are insane. They're not about actual sexual relations between people, just like the environmentalists aren't actually about conservation and all this stuff. But nobody wants to go back to a world where a woman can't choose what life she wants. I mean, I always say to people, if you draw a circle that's called individualism and a circle that's called feminism, in that place, the Venn diagram where they meet, I'll agree with feminism. Everything outside of that, I don't agree with. But nobody wants to go back to a world where a woman can't be fully whoever she wants to be. And nobody certainly wants to go back to a racially segregated world, except the left.
Right, they oddly are the ones that are pushing these things, like you just described at Oberlin.
And so the modern right is, to some degree, a function of certain things that leftists have also brought to the table, and have now become the party of freedom, the party of hilarity. I mean, you do not laugh a lot when you're around leftists, and when you watch them, when you watch Samantha Bee on television, it's not funny.
It's not funny. It's
funny.
painful.
Yeah.
It's da-da-da-da Trump.
Effing Trump.
Yeah,
you got to put it in the
right, and they have to bleep it because it's on TBS. So even if the fuck meant anything to you,
it's not even an exciting fuck. No. This is the funny thing about it, is like when you hear them doing that, the cursing and the anger and the rage. Not a lot of laughs there.
So then when you see people on the right, so like a Jeff Sessions, who there's a lot of talk that he's going to go in and try to close medical marijuana dispensaries. Now, you just made it very clear you don't smoke marijuana, you prefer everything being equal if people didn't for health reasons. I think there's a lot of debate around that, but I'm just going with what you said. When you see that as a small government guy and a states' rights guy and a libertarian, that must be the part of the right that you don't like, right?
Yeah, I don't even know why you would bother with that. I mean, I don't know why there should be medical marijuana dispensaries. Why shouldn't it just be like a liquor store? You can't buy it if you're not 18 or whatever the proper age is, and you can't use it behind the wheel of a car and all those things. And then we get to tax it and get all that money. But I don't know why that should be what's bothering him, I mean, I really like Jeff Sessions. I'm a pro Jeff Sessions guy. I think he's going to be a great AG. I think he's going to do.
But are you concerned about that state stuff? Because to me, that's one of the biggest issues there is.
The states' rights.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that's kind of a joy about the Trump era is all these liberal states suing the federal government, because I think I win that either way.
Yeah.
I either win because the federal government gets the conservative thing in there, or I win because they get states' rights. So,
yeah. And that's why the whole, as I've now been saying every week, I mean, the whole chessboard is just thrown up. The traditional left-right thing barely makes sense. It's authoritarians and libertarians and allies, coming together in some interesting spots.
Well, I describe it as like being in a room where the gravity has gone out of the room and all the furniture is floating around. And, you don't know where it's going to land. And I understand some of these guys, like National Review and even my pal Ben Shapiro, I understand they're worried about where the furniture may fall. I'm kind of optimistic. And I'm not sure how much of that is constitutional and how much of it is observational,
Right.
But I do feel that good things are coming. I look to the generations down the line, and what I see coming up is kind of a cultural liberalism, which I agree with, but an understanding that freedom is economic and freedom is governmental, and if the government can tell you what to like and what to do, it's just, it's not, you're not free.
Yeah.
And they're not that smart.